My name is Ethan Thorne, and for most of my 34 years, my life has been a quiet melody played in a familiar key. I'm an archivist at the Willow Creek County Historical Society, a job that suits my temperament. I find solace in the scent of old paper, the rustle of turning pages, and the stories whispered by documents that have outlived their authors. Willow Creek, nestled in the rolling foothills of the Appalachian Range, is more than just a town, it's a tapestry woven with threads of history, community, and the gentle rhythm of the seasons. My cottage, a small, stone-built haven on Hawthorne Lane, with its rambling roses and slightly crooked chimney, was my sanctuary, a place where I thought I'd built a life as sturdy and enduring as the ancient oaks that line our street. Until recently, I believed I had a marriage that mirrored this quiet strength, a partnership with Clara, the woman I loved. Clara. Even now, her name conjures images of sunlight dappled through leaves, of laughter that echoed like wind chimes. We met 10 years ago, when I was a somewhat earnest 24-year-old, still finding my footing after university, immersed in my first real role at the archives. She was 23, a whirlwind of creative energy, working part-time at The Artisan's Nook, a local gallery, while dreaming of a career as a textile artist. Our paths crossed at the annual Willow Creek Cider Festival. It was a crisp autumn day, the air alive with the scent of spiced apples and wood smoke. I was, perhaps predictably, hovering near a display of antique apple pressing equipment, lost in thought. She approached me, a mischievous glint in her hazel eyes, and asked if I was planning to historically preserve the moment or actually try some cider. Her directness, so different from my own reserved nature, was like a splash of cold, refreshing water. We talked for hours that day, amidst the cheerful chaos of the festival, and a new, vibrant movement was added to the symphony of my life. Our courtship was a blend of her adventurous spirit and my quiet appreciation. Clara introduced me to hiking trails I'd only read about, to hidden waterfalls, and to the joy of impromptu picnics under star-strewn skies. I, in turn, offered her a calm harbor, a steady presence she said she'd never found before. She loved the stories I'd unearthed from the archives, the way I could make the past come alive. For a while, her textile art flourished, inspired by local flora and historical patterns I'd show her. She'd spend hours in her small studio space, the hum of her loom a gentle counterpoint to my quiet reading. Eventually, though, the demands of commissions and the uncertainty of a purely artistic income led her to dedicate more time to our home, becoming, in essence, a homemaker, though her creative spark still flickered in the beautiful way she arranged flowers or the unique touches she added to our meals. We married 3 years after we met, a simple ceremony in the community hall, surrounded by the warm embrace of close friends and family. There was no grand reception, no extravagant expense. Instead, we had a potluck feast under the spreading branches of the old maple tree in the town square, the air filled with music from local folk musicians. It felt right, authentic. Soon after, we found our little cottage on Hawthorne Lane. It needed work, a leaky roof, a garden overgrown with weeds, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, but it had what Clara called good bones and a soul that resonated with us both. We poured our savings, a modest sum of around $15,000, into making it our own, spending weekends painting, planting, and dreaming. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd walk to the archives each morning, the familiar streets of Willow Creek greeting me like old friends. Clara would often be tending her vibrant cottage garden or experimenting with new recipes when I returned. Evenings were for shared meals, quiet conversations, or sometimes, Clara reading aloud from a novel while I sketched local historical buildings. We decided, mutually, to postpone the idea of children. We wanted to feel more established, perhaps save a little more. Clara, especially, felt she needed more time to find herself fully, a sentiment I supported, though perhaps didn't fully understand at the time. Looking back, through the sometimes painful clarity of hindsight, I see the subtle shifts, the almost imperceptible widening of a hairline crack in our foundation. My contentment, my love for our quiet life, might have seemed like complacency to Clara. Her energy, once a source of shared joy, began to seek outlets beyond our shared world. She thrived on social interaction, on being the center of a lively group, her laughter the brightest in the room. I, more introspective, was happy to be the quiet observer, admiring her radiance. I suppose I took her vibrancy for granted, assuming it was an inexhaustible spring that would always nourish our life together. We had disagreements, of course, usually minor things, my tendency to leave books scattered around, her occasional forgetfulness about errands. Nothing that felt like a tremor, more like the house settling. But the earth beneath us was slowly, silently, preparing to shift. 2 years ago, the dynamic of our little corner of Hawthorne Lane changed with the arrival of Julian Vance. The previous occupants of the house next door, the kindly old Henderson sisters, had moved to a retirement community in a sunnier clime. Julian was in his late 20s, younger than most on our street. He was a traveling photographer and, more recently, a certified mindfulness and meditation guide, a role he embraced with a serene, almost beatific air. He was undeniably charismatic, with a gentle voice, a way of looking at you as if you were the only person in the world, and a physique honed by what he called conscious movement. He often held small, informal meditation sessions in his backyard, the faint scent of sandalwood drifting over our fence. Clara was drawn to him almost immediately. It wasn't overt, not at first. The first time we officially met Julian was when he came over with a small pot of herbs as a housewarming gift for us, a peace lily that he said promoted tranquility. He spoke with a calm assurance, his words flowing like a gentle stream. Clara, who had always been a good conversationalist, seemed particularly animated, asking him about his travels, his photography, his philosophy on mindfulness. I stood by, a little in awe of his seemingly effortless poise, contributing little beyond polite nods. I didn't think much of it then. Clara was naturally friendly, she could strike up a conversation with anyone, from the postman to the grocer at Miller's General Store. But the interactions began to subtly change. If Julian was in his garden, perhaps tending his meticulously arranged Zen rockery, Clara would find a reason to be in ours, weeding her flower beds or just getting some air. These coincidences led to longer conversations over the low stone wall that separated our properties. I'd come home from the archives to find them chatting, Clara's laughter brighter, more frequent than I'd heard it in a while. Julian was just telling me about a fascinating meditation retreat he attended in Nepal, she'd say, her eyes shining. Then came the small offerings. Clara, who hadn't baked regularly in ages, suddenly started making batches of sunrise muffins, or chia seed energy bars, recipes she said Julian had shared. A plate would invariably make its way next door. Just being neighborly, she'd explain, a phrase that began to echo with a certain hollowness in my ears. She bought new, brightly colored activewear, for her new mindfulness practice, she said. Julian had offered to guide her through some basic yoga and meditation techniques. Soon, I'd see them in his yard in the early mornings, Julian's calm voice guiding her through poses, Clara's form silhouetted against the rising sun. A part of me, the part that cherished her well-being, was glad she'd found a new interest. Another, smaller, more hesitant part, felt a quiet disquiet. Her phone, once an open book, became more private. She'd angle the screen away if I walked into the room, or quickly close an app. Once, glancing over her shoulder, I saw Julian's distinctive profile picture on her social media feed. She scrolled past it hastily. He posts some beautiful landscape photos, she offered, a little too quickly. The way she spoke of him shifted too. It wasn't just, Julian said, but, Julian believes, or, Julian feels. There was a new reverence in her tone. And the glances, quick, fleeting looks towards his house when we were in the garden together, looks I tried to tell myself were insignificant. I still held back from voicing my unease. I trusted Clara. Our 10 years together, our shared history, the life we built in our little stone cottage, surely that was a fortress. But a nagging whisper, one I tried to ignore, suggested that even fortresses could be breached, not by force, but by a slow, insidious erosion from within. I decided to wait, to observe, telling myself I was being patient, when perhaps I was simply afraid of the answer my questions might bring. The reckoning came on a Saturday morning, one that began with the deceptive normalcy of any other weekend. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I was nursing a cup of Earl Grey tea, the Willow Creek Chronicle spread before me, its familiar scent of newsprint a comforting anchor. Clara had been quiet all morning, moving about the cottage with a restless energy that felt out of sync with the peaceful dawn. She finally sat opposite me at our small, oak table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her usual vibrant glow was dimmed, replaced by a pallor I hadn't seen before. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk." Those 4 words, so often a prelude to pain, hung heavy in the sunlit kitchen. My heart, which had been beating in its usual steady rhythm, gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. I set down my teacup, its clink against the saucer unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "All right, Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice even, gentle. "What is it?" She took a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on her tightly knotted fingers. I don't know how to say this." She looked up then, her hazel eyes clouded with a turmoil that mirrored the storm gathering in my own chest. "Ethan, I think I have feelings for Julian." The world seemed to tilt. The familiar comfort of our kitchen, the scent of toast and tea, the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, it all receded, replaced by a roaring silence in my ears. "Julian?" I managed, the name feeling foreign, bitter on my tongue. "I didn't want this to happen," she rushed on, tears welling in her eyes. It grew. We've been spending time together, talking, meditating, and there's this connection, Ethan. A different kind of connection. And now I'm so confused." Confused. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. Not regretful, not apologetic for a boundary crossed, but confused. As if our marriage, our decade of shared life, was now just one of 2 equally viable options in a perplexing equation she needed to solve. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of her words. Was this an affair? A confession? A plea for help? "What does this mean, Clara?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "For us?" She shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "I don't know. That's the problem. I still care about you, Ethan, I do. But I can't ignore these feelings for Julian. I need to understand them." She paused, then delivered the blow that would shatter the already fragile peace. "I was thinking. I need some space. Perhaps I could stay with Julian for a month. Just to explore this, to see if it's real. And if it's not, then we can try to work on us, to rebuild." A month. With him. To explore. The audacity of it, the casual disregard for my feelings, for the sanctity of what we had built, left me breathless. It was as if she was proposing a trial separation from me, by moving in with the man she had feelings for. My first instinct was a tidal wave of anger, of betrayal. I wanted to shout, to demand how she could even suggest such a thing. But as I looked at her, at the genuine, albeit self-absorbed, distress on her face, something else rose within me. A profound sadness, yes, but also a strange, cold clarity. If our marriage had come to this, if she valued it so little that she could propose such an arrangement, then perhaps the foundation was already beyond repair. My voice, when I finally found it, was quieter than I expected. "A month, Clara?" I repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of disbelief. Her eyes pleaded with me. "I know it sounds unconventional, Ethan. But I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to look back years from now and wonder, what if? I need to do this, for myself. For my own peace of mind." She spoke of her peace, her regrets, as if my own heart wasn't splintering in that sunlit kitchen. I leaned back in my chair, the old oak groaning faintly beneath me. The initial shock was morphing into a weary resolve. Arguing, pleading, raging, what would it achieve? She had already made her choice, even if she framed it as a search for one. "All right, Clara," I said, the words tasting like ash. "If that's what you feel you need to do." A flicker of surprise, then immense relief, washed over her face. "Oh, Ethan, thank you," she breathed, reaching for my hand. "I know this is hard, but I truly believe it's the only way for me to find clarity." I gently withdrew my hand. "Do what you need to do, Clara," I said, my voice flat. I rose and walked to the window, staring out at the roses she had so lovingly tended, their vibrant colors suddenly looking garish. Inside, a part of me had already begun to shut down, to retreat into a protective shell. If she was willing to gamble our life together on a month-long exploration with another man, then the game was already lost. I wouldn't show her the depth of my devastation, not yet. But in that moment, as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across our kitchen floor, I knew something within me had irrevocably changed. The next few days passed in a strange, muted haze. Clara moved with a quiet efficiency, packing a small travel case. She spoke of her arrangement with Julian in hushed, almost reverent tones, as if embarking on a spiritual retreat rather than moving in with a neighbor to test romantic feelings. She seemed oblivious to the chasm that had opened between us, or perhaps she chose to ignore it, buoyed by my quiet acquiescence. I didn't question her, didn't argue. I simply observed, a silent spectator to the dismantling of my life. The morning she left, Hawthorne Lane was bathed in a soft, pearlescent light. She paused at the doorway, her case in hand. "I'll be in touch, Ethan," she said, her voice uncertain for the first time. "We can talk." I merely nodded. She gave a small, hesitant smile, then turned and walked down the path, her silhouette briefly framed by the rose arch before she disappeared towards Julian's cottage. The click of our garden gate closing behind her was a sound of profound finality. The silence she left in her wake was immense, a living entity that filled every corner of our small home. It wasn't just quiet, it was an emptiness, a void where her laughter, her presence, her very essence, used to be. I walked through the rooms, touching the things she'd left behind, her favorite earthenware mug on the draining board, a half-finished novel, the bed, the scent of her lavender and bergamot shampoo lingering in the bathroom. Each object was a small, sharp reminder of what was, and what, I suspected, would never be again. That first week was a lesson in navigating a landscape of grief I hadn't known existed. I went to the archives, losing myself in the meticulous cataloging of historical land deeds and parish records. The past, with its defined narratives and concluded stories, felt safer than my own uncertain present. Evenings were the hardest. The cottage felt too large, too silent. The simple act of preparing a meal for one was a stark reminder of my solitude. I reached out to my older sister, Eleanor. She lived a few hours away, in a bustling university town where she taught botany. Eleanor had always been my anchor, her pragmatism and warmth a steadying force in my life. I called her, my voice faltering as I recounted Clara's decision. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then Eleanor's voice, firm but gentle. "Ethan," she said, "this is a shock. I'm so sorry you're going through this." She listened patiently as I poured out my confusion, my hurt, my dawning anger. "She wants to find her feelings by moving in with him?" Eleanor echoed, a note of incredulity in her tone. "Ethan, darling, you deserve so much more than to be someone's, maybe, someone's experiment. Her clarity shouldn't come at the expense of your dignity." Her words resonated deeply. My dignity. In my quiet way, I had always prided myself on my integrity, my respect for others. But in this situation, I realized I had neglected to afford that same respect to myself. Clara's request, however couched in terms of personal growth, was a profound act of disrespect to our marriage and to me. "What do I do, Elle?" I asked, feeling utterly lost. "For now," she said, "you breathe. You take care of yourself. You let yourself feel whatever you need to feel. But Ethan, don't just wait. Don't put your life on hold while she explores. You need to think about what you want, what you need for your future. Eleanor's words became my mantra. I began to reclaim the quiet spaces of my life. I started tending the garden with a renewed focus, finding a meditative solace in the rhythm of weeding and watering. The roses, which had seemed garish on the day Clara left, now felt like symbols of resilience, their thorns a reminder of the need for boundaries. I spent long hours at the Willow Creek Public Library, delving into local folklore, a passion I hadn't indulged in years. The silence of the cottage gradually transformed from an oppressive void into a space for reflection, for rediscovery. I began to see the patterns in our marriage more clearly, my tendency to accommodate, Clara's increasing need for external validation, the slow drift from us to me and her. The love had been real, I knew that. But perhaps it hadn't been enough, or perhaps it had been a love built on an uneven foundation, one where my needs were often subsumed by hers. A fortnight into Clara's exploration, I made a decision. It wasn't born of anger or a desire for revenge, but from a place of quiet self-respect. I looked up the number for a solicitor Eleanor had recommended, a Miss Harriet Albright, known for her compassionate yet firm approach to family law. Making that appointment was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, yet it also felt like the first truly empowering step I'd taken in weeks. Ms. Albright's office was in a restored Victorian building on Willow Creek's Main Street, filled with the scent of lemon polish and old books, a comforting familiarity. She listened to my story with an expression of quiet empathy, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice calm and measured, "what your wife has done constitutes a clear basis for separation, what we term irreconcilable differences. Her actions, regardless of her intent, have fractured the marital agreement." Irreconcilable differences. The phrase, though a legal term, felt profoundly accurate. Our paths, our understandings of love and commitment, had diverged so completely. Ms. Albright explained the process, the paperwork involved, the timelines. I left her office with a folder of documents and a heavy heart, but also with a sense of clarity that was entirely my own. I was no longer waiting for Clara to define our future. I was taking control of mine. I didn't tell Clara about this. Her communication had been sparse, a few brief, almost perfunctory texts, "Hope you're okay," or "Weather's lovely here. Jay says hi." No mention of her exploration, no indication of her thoughts or feelings about us. It was as if I was an afterthought, a loose end to be dealt with later. This silence, more than anything, solidified my resolve. The month passed with the slow, deliberate pace of a changing season. Autumn was beginning to paint Willow Creek in hues of gold and crimson. The air grew crisp, and the scent of wood smoke once again filled the evenings. I found a quiet rhythm in my solitude, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a growing sense of peace, of self-acceptance. Then, almost exactly 4 weeks after she'd left, Clara returned. I was in the living room, reading by the light of the fire I'd just kindled, when I heard the familiar click of the garden gate. My heart gave a jolt, a conditioned response. A moment later, she was at the door, her travel case beside her. She looked different. Her usual vibrant energy seemed muted, her expression uncertain. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft. "I'm back." I put down my book, my carefully cultivated composure feeling suddenly fragile. "Clara," I acknowledged, keeping my voice neutral. She stepped inside, a hesitant smile playing on her lips. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the armchair opposite mine. "Please." She sat, perching on the edge of the seat. "I've done a lot of thinking, Ethan," she began, her gaze earnest. "This past month, it's been illuminating." She paused, then continued, "Julian is a wonderful person, truly. Kind, spiritual, but..." She trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. "But he's not you, Ethan. He doesn't have your depth, your stability. What we had, what we have, it's real. I was just, distracted, I think. Caught up in something that seemed exciting and new. But I see now. I want us, Ethan. I want to come home. I believe we can rebuild this. She looked at me, her eyes hopeful, expecting, perhaps, relief or even gratitude. She spoke of rebuilding, as if our marriage was a piece of furniture that had been slightly damaged and needed a bit of polish. The pain I felt was not for the loss of her, but for the profound misunderstanding she still held about the depth of the wound she had inflicted. I listened patiently until she finished. Then, I rose, went to the antique writing desk in the corner, and retrieved the folder Ms. Albright had given me. I placed it gently on the small table between us. "What's this?" Clara asked, her smile faltering. "These are separation papers, Clara," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her face drained of color. "Separation? Ethan, you can't be serious." A nervous laugh escaped her. "This is some kind of test, right?" "No, Clara," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm perfectly serious. I'm not interested in being your second choice, or a safe harbor you return to when your exploration doesn't pan out." Her expression shifted from disbelief to a dawning anger. "Second choice? That's not fair." I was confused. I needed to understand my feelings. "I did this for us, so I wouldn't have regrets." "And in seeking to avoid your own regrets, Clara," I replied, my voice still calm, "you created a situation where my only regret would be to allow this to continue. You left our home, our marriage, to live with another man. You can't simply walk back in and expect everything to be as it was. That's not how respect works. That's not how love works." Tears welled in her eyes, this time tears of frustration and, perhaps, a dawning understanding of the consequences of her actions. "But I love you, Ethan. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Can't we fix this?" A wave of sadness washed over me. The mistake, Clara, was in believing that our marriage could withstand that kind of test. Some things, once broken, can't be mended in the same way. You made your choice when you walked out that door. And I've made mine. The ensuing hour was filled with her pleas, her anger, her tears, her accusations that I was being cold, unforgiving. She spoke of our history, of the love we'd shared, of the future we'd planned. Each word was a fresh pang, but my resolve held. It was the hardest conversation of my life, but it was also a necessary one, for my own healing, for my own self-worth. Eventually, her energy spent, she picked up her case and left, the silence descending once more, but this time it felt different, less like an emptiness, more like a space cleared for something new. The legal process was, mercifully, straightforward. Clara, after an initial period of resistance and attempts to sway me through mutual friends, eventually accepted the situation. We divided our modest assets with a quiet civility. The cottage, which I had loved but which now held too many painful memories, we agreed to sell. The proceeds were split fairly. I found a small apartment overlooking the Willow Creek town square, its windows offering a view of the changing seasons and the life of the community I cherished. Months have passed since then. The ache in my heart has softened, like the weathered stone of an old building, still bearing the marks of its history but standing firm. I sometimes hear snippets about Clara. Julian, it seems, moved on to his next spiritual adventure, and Clara, I heard, enrolled in a textile design course at the regional college, a flicker of her old dream rekindled. I hope she finds what she's looking for. Just last week, I saw her at The Daily Grind, Willow Creek's beloved coffee shop. Our eyes met across the crowded room. There was a moment of awkward recognition, a ghost of shared history hanging in the air. She offered a small, hesitant smile. I returned it with a gentle nod, then turned back to my book. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter closed. Life has a way of leading us down unexpected paths, of teaching us lessons in the most challenging of classrooms. This experience, as painful as it was, taught me the profound importance of self-respect, the necessity of healthy boundaries, and the quiet strength that can be found in honoring one's own worth. My melody is different now, perhaps more melancholic in places, but also richer, imbued with a deeper understanding of myself and what truly matters. I am still Ethan Thorne, the archivist from Willow Creek, a man who finds solace in the quiet unfolding of stories. And now, I am learning to write my own, with a newfound sense of peace, and an open heart, ready for whatever the next movement may bring. The path ahead is uncertain, but I walk it with a quiet confidence, knowing that the most important relationship I must nurture is the one I have with myself. And in that, there is a gentle, enduring inspiration.